morning. Okay, I lost my place.
Ah, thank you.
Okay, the Browns were responsible for the goodies.
Thank you.
No visitors? All right. Okay, well, we've got a couple of birthdays. Dora and Deuce. You forgot. And Sandra Montgomery. It's your birthday.
Oh,
39.
You forgot too.
Nice try, Sandra. Okay, and we also have a couple of anniversaries this week. In fact, today is Roger and Judy's birthday. How many?
All my life. I mean, 56.
All right. And you're going for 57, huh?
Well, she behaves.
And the Vanderslashes, Charles and Lloyd.
Number 60.
And you might notice they're quite well dressed for the occasion. Stand up, let the class see. Okay, we had any cares or concerns?
No.
You've forgotten another anniversary.
Yeah, today,
Lindy and Bob.
they're first.
You missed an anniversary.
Sir?
Today is our first wedding anniversary.
And may you have many more.
What'd she say?
All right, were there any other concerns? Joe?
Oh, get on the bus.
Well, this is a day of reckoning. But I want to tell you a story first. This man went to heaven. He met St. Peter's. And he said, St. Peter's, can you get married in heaven? And St. Peter said, well, I don't know. Give me some time. I'll research it. And he was gone about 2 or 3 days. He didn't come back. Gone about a week, didn't come back. Then he was gone 2 weeks, and finally he came back. He said, yeah, you can get married in heaven. He said, well, can you get a divorce in heaven? He said, listen, if it's taken me 2 weeks to find a preacher, I'll never find a lawyer. No. Either sign it or take your chances.
Thank you, Joe. That was a different sort of approach. Does anyone want to try and top that one? Okay. Lucille gave me a card here, a thank you from one of our recipients. He writes, thank you in your Sunday school class for the generous $1,000 scholarship. It will help pay for textbooks and other college expenses. I've appreciated the support of the First United Methodist Church, Georgetown, throughout my childhood and look forward to visiting often. Thanks again, sincerely, Luke Skeels. I think most of you know those three kids. That's our string section in the orchestra. Okay,
Well, I have a.
you have an announcement?
Sure. Let's see here. Well, the State Board of Certified Public Accountants met in Austin last weekend, and amongst other things, they made an award that I want you to know about. The award was for a gentleman who had been a CPA in the state of Texas for 50 years, and that gentleman is Jim Ratcliffe. That is quite a recognition, isn't it?
Years, Joe, are you gonna retire ever?
Every time.
I'll bet. All right, we're gonna have Zoe Wilson do the prayer, and then our lesson this morning will be by Kim.
Dick, I want to know if I'm passing the microphone test. Help me.
Just right.
Am I right? I'll try not to move. This morning, as your thoughts most likely are centered around so much turmoil that people are facing, I am taken back to 1948, and I'm sitting on a ladder picking cherries off of the tree in my minister uncle's backyard at his parsonage in Longmont, Colorado. Wonderful experience. I can close my eyes and be there even now. So we go fast forward, and I am now one of the spouses touring the Colorado ministry for the rural ministries. And we got a chance as spouses to go look at the work of the church there. Longmont, Colorado. I'm back there again. I get to go to the very church where I went in as a child. I could not find the parsonage because it had been removed. But that wonderful experience came back. And as our bus left after this tour, I guess I had my nose pressed against the glass of the bus window, because the woman sitting next to me said, "You evidently enjoyed this trip." And I told her why. And she said, "Well, I don't have that same memory of Longmont. I was behind a detention barbed wire fence here because of my Japanese American background. And my family and I spent time behind fences with guards, and that's my memory of Longmont." So I guess from then on, I have had a compassionate heart. And I think this morning I'm just going to pray that the compassionate heart of Jesus can surround all of us who might be able to make a difference somehow in many, many areas. So if you'll join me with some prayer thoughts. Loving God, for the gift of compassion that came to dwell among us, we thank you. For the walking that our Jesus showed us, that we take every day, we thank you. Help us not to stray from the path that he has shown us and continues to show us. Keep our hearts compassionate and caring. We ask forgiveness where we have erred and give you our thanks that you wait to forgive. Help us to do so and guide our ways in these days that are ahead of us. Be with, as we know you are, loved ones in this class who are grieving and who are in illness. We thank you for your presence in their lives and for binding us together in love. Amen.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Zoe. That was so interesting and touching. And thank you for that remembrance and for that prayer. Well, on this July the 4th of 1776, in the city of Philadelphia, a new nation was formed, really. And when that declaration was read out into the streets of Philadelphia, there was great cheering among the crowds of people. And of course, 242 years later, we have every need and every right to cheer too. Now, today you will be disappointed, I'm sure, to know that we're not going to have our annual 4th of July program. And the reason is simply because we only have one volunteer. Despite my request, this time I just simply refuse to walk up to people and buttonhole them and look them in the eye and ask them if they would do this when they hadn't volunteered and obviously therefore really didn't want to. So the way I felt about it is that we have done this for so many years that people probably just simply don't have anything else to say. But nevertheless, next year we will make have this opportunity again. But today we're going to continue, and actually I'm happy to do so because of various interruptions and so on. I've had a hard time getting this particular series off the ground, so I'm kind of happy to be able to do it. I'm reading the wonderful book, Christianity for the Rest of Us, by Dana Butler Bass. I noticed in the bookstore the other day she has a new book out. It's entitled Gratitude. And she has written numerous books, and I think is one of the leading Christian writers today. Now, last time, if you recall, we had a lesson on being a church that had hospitality, and by that they weren't talking about church growth or anything like that. They were just talking about having a friendly church for new people to come and to feel welcome. They were also talking about having a friendly church for the members. And at the end of the lesson, we asked, and I intend to ask today as well, how does this church rank in terms of being friendly and welcoming? And we felt, well, this church does pretty well in that area. We felt so. And actually that particular quality or trait was the #1 listed trait in the research study that this author conducted. As I explained the last time, we won't go into it this time, this is a research project. The book is a report of the research project of effective mainline Protestant churches. And so being a welcoming, friendly congregation was the #1 trait. The #2 trait was what is called discernment. Christians believe, and I want to comment, by the way, that as I move through this, I'm going to be talking about some pretty important and heavy things. And should you have the desire to comment, especially would welcome your comments today. I called Ann because I really wanted her to be here today. And she is here today. I am so happy that you are. Because, Ann, the purpose of my call was not only to set up a breakfast date, but also I wanted you to be here today because I have talked with you enough and know you well enough that you feel very deeply about this, and I really wanted to have your comments on this. Now, Christians believe that human beings have the capacity to hear, to see God, and a genuine sensing of truth through which we know God and God's will for our lives. Many books have been written in Christianity about finding God's will for your life. Now, Christians call this discernment. And in case you're not familiar with the word, I looked it up in Webster's New World Dictionary, and the way he talks about it, it means to perceive, to recognize, to make out clearly, and it often implies a keen understanding. Now, so the churches in this research project that ranked high in discernment, they learned to ask questions of God and then listen carefully for God's inner wisdom for their community. Questions such as, who are we? What does God want us to do? How can we be faithful to God's call? Our author refers to these as God's questions, and they are good questions. Discernment is a serious reflection on Scripture, grounded in prayer and informed by experience. Those three. It is both entirely personal and entirely communal. What we're talking about today has to do with you personally and with our church, and yes, with our denomination, although that's a more difficult thing for us to affect. Discernment entails more than just listening to God. One writer has written a book, and in fact, I hope to find that book. I couldn't find it the other day in Barnes & Noble, but I'll order it perhaps. I would really like to read his book. But he feels that there are 5 phases to discernment. The first one is faith. You just can't be a discerning Christian and go into your Christian faith without faith. You have to be a person who believes and who has a strong belief. Distinguishing between good and evil. Yes, there is evil in the world. All you have to do is turn on the television or look at the newspaper, and you will find several instances of evil in the world. And not just in the world, but in our midst. And the question is, in the discernment process, what am I going to do to defeat evil? Think of the thing that troubles you the most, and ask the question, what can I do, what will I do to address that and to defeat it? The third one I appreciate, practical wisdom, is something that my dad used to call common sense. He believed strongly in plain old common sense. But such questions as, well, will this work? So often in church, I think, we come up with ideas and put them on paper and get into it, and we find out it doesn't work. We have to have practical wisdom. Number 4, the sensitivity to pursue God's will. God's will for your life and God's will for the church's life. You have to discern what God's will is, and after you do, then the question is, are you willing to do it? And then the fifth, the contemplation of God's wisdom. It reminds me of Solomon, who prayed for wisdom. Now, there's a difference between wisdom and information. We probably have more information at hand in our lives than we ever have before. It's called the computer and all those type things. We've got information, but do we have wisdom? Now, these 5 movements of discernment form a pattern of discerning, of the discerning life, individual and communal. When discernment moves an individual or a community toward contemplative wisdom, transformation, and the turnabout of our lives results. So we meet truth as the beauty of holiness. This is exactly what Jesus referred to when he told Nicodemus that he must be born again. And born again in God's truth and love. And this is what Jesus meant when he said, I am the way. Let me digress just for a little on this idea of holiness. There is this book, Holy Contradictions, which is a book recently published by United Methodist Press, or House. And I'm not interested in really discussing that book or its purpose. I just want to quote a few lines from one of the articles. I read them all. One of the articles, the writer was talking about holiness. And since I was in the midst of preparing this lesson, this statement just stood out for me. Let me read this about holiness and think about your own life. One of the 10 Commandments tells us to observe the Sabbath day and to treat it as holy as holy. God's example and God's design for creation teaches us holiness. As Christians, we are called holy in the Bible. People who are called out in the world. People who live by higher standards. Now, that sentence says a lot, and I want to read it again. As Christians, we are called holy in the Bible. You know, it seems to me that there are a lot of terms that could accurately be applied to every one of us as Christians, and holy is one. I wonder how you feel about that. You know, we've heard jokes referring to someone as a holy Joe. And I wonder, beg pardon? What did you say, Joe Wilson?
Just took offense with the term Joe.
But, you know, how do you feel about yourself as being a holy person? We are people who are shaped by relationships with the Holy One every day, and that changes everything. Now, one may argue that we lose people because we are not trendy in society. But I would argue that we lose people because we do not consistently strive toward holiness. When you live a holy life, different from the world, you might risk people laughing at you or blaming you. But Jesus walked this way before us, and he made it clear for people to understand what holy is and what it is not. His message was clear, challenging, unsettling, and transforming. And he wants us to be holy because God is holy. So I just think it's important to think about that word holy and then to apply it to our lives. Does it seem to fit, or does it seem strange that you would think of yourself as holy? Now, in discernment, deep into contemplation, we come to the conclusion that we are called out, that we are holy. And from this, we must not shirk. We are called out. Our pastor used that term in her sermon this morning. We are called out from the people of the world. We are called out to be holy. And by holiness, it is meant living a life that is based on a strong reverence for God. In the old Latin Vulgate, sanctus is used. In other words, a consecrated life. Called out, yes, we are called out from the world about us. We are called by God. As Eric McKinney said last week, we are called out to be the church. We are the church. It isn't this building. Those of us in this room, we are the church. We are called out to be the church. So I wish, or I pray really, not wish, that you would start thinking of yourself as being one who is called out by the Holy Spirit to be holy and to be the church. Now, the model church for this matter of being a friendly, welcoming church, the last time we spoke on this was a Methodist church in southwestern Florida. The model church for this matter of discernment is the Church of the Redeemer in Washington, D.C. It's Episcopalian church. The writer talks about this church quite a bit, I think. And from 1991 to 95, a different spirit flew into this Episcopalian church. And when you read this, you kind of have a hard time believing it if you know anything about Episcopalian churches, which Dixie and I do because of her long-time association with that church in Orange. They're on Park Avenue. So the Episcopalian church felt in Washington that they were being called out from the world and that they were being called by God. Yes. But a different spirit blew into this church, and through the Spirit, and this is a quote from one of the members, it literally blew in. It was very much about discerning of God, and if God in fact was present in our church. Their first question is God present in our church? And after discerning where God was calling us, it was about the call itself to our church. Those were the words that we used deliberately and in order. The call, discernment, and then ministry. Those in that order. This matter of discernment in this Episcopalian church became the church priority. They had spun their wells for a long time and without much success, and they just finally stopped and put everything down and said, let's think and let's pray and let's see where we are with God and what He wants us to be. There was much prayer. There was much prayer. Much of the prayer was with prayer partners, which is to say we would match this person with this person, and they would meet at some point and they would pray together. This happened to me out in Glorieta, New Mexico, in my years at Baylor. Went out there and for a huge youth conference. And I was assigned to pray with this boy, and he happened to be from Hardin Simmons. And so we just literally walked up in the mountains and sat down and prayed together. It was a new experience for me. I'd never done that before, because here I was with a complete stranger. And I must confess to you that I was uncomfortable about it. I was uncomfortable about it, because I was sitting there praying with someone that I didn't even know. But as the experience went on, as we prayed, and he prayed for a long time, much longer than I did, well, I did start to see the value of that. Now, they would pursue the question, where is God in your personal ministry? And all of us, of course, are ministers. That's another term, that we need to put in your life. You're a minister. Yeah, you're a minister just like Ann is a minister. You're a minister just like Joe is a minister. All of us are ministers of God. So where is God in your ministry, and where is God in our church? And when they asked these questions in time, it transformed that Episcopalian church in D.C. At first, it was awkward. As one of the ladies commented, she was very intimidated. This idea of prayer and praying with someone else, or being asked to pray in a group. Do you remember the first time that you were asked to pray in church? It was intimidating, wasn't it? I remember my first time for sure. It was intimidated, and she was comfortable, but she stayed there and she worked on it and worked it out. One gentleman has this remembrance: I'm more open to encountering God. I'm more aware when it happens. I might not have noticed God's presence before, but I'm more attuned to it now. What a wonderful result that would be. So, praying, listening, paying attention to the Spirit, new awareness. This discernment became a shaping practice that quite literally transformed the church of the Redeemer. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to ask you to discuss this. And do you think that our church needs to be transformed? And if so, do you think that this lesson today on discernment and prayer would have anything to do with that transformation? I'm going to close by giving you a wonderful statement from a minister of this church. We are opening the congregation to a greater experience of the Holy Spirit. We are asking more of our people than just coming to church on Sunday. It is just time. It is time to pay attention to the promptings of the Spirit and move on them to God's future. That's a wonderful statement that church started asking more of its members than just coming to church on Sunday, but to be attuned to the Spirit. We have been talking a lot about prayer and contemplation, prayer alone, prayer with others, and trying to ask the question, as a church, what are we doing? Where is God? And so that is, I think, a decent summary of this chapter. And I'm wondering if we have any comments from you. Margaret is reading this book. And Margaret, you may have some comments on this chapter. No? Okay, Ann? Yes.
Well, I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again, of the last church I pastored. It shows you the example of how discernment can be used in a church and the power of it. One of my parishioners died suddenly and unexpectedly. Her family wanted to put a stained glass window in the church to commemorate it. Well, when they went to check out about putting in a stained glass window, they discovered that some of the trestles in the church building had been broken, which then put us in a state of liability if anything should happen in that church to anyone because of the failed state. So we ended up having a charge conference to decide what to do. And what became immediately obvious was about a third of the congregation wanted to fix the church. About a third of the congregation wanted to go build another metal church, out of town. And the other third didn't care which we did, they just wanted to take care of the problem and fix it. And so the only thing I kept getting during times of prayer and things like that, because we actually did the meeting in a discernment process, or structured hopefully to have scripture and sit with it, and then have some discussion and see if we could assess what God might be speaking to us. And all I kept getting was like 12. So, 4 and 12. What I ended up doing at the end of the prayer time was asking each of the 3 groups to organize, select 4 people to represent them, and give me those 4 people for 12 weeks. What they didn't know is all 12 of those people were going to spend the whole 12 weeks praying about what we were going to do. So what I did was I worked up prayer sheets for every week, and their charge was to listen to those scriptures, earnestly pray that God would give us a sense of peace in our heart and our feelings about what we were supposed to do. And they were supposed to try on building the new metal building or repairing the existing building and so forth. Well, and then every 4 weeks we met as a group to talk about it. One week, one of the men said, I was sitting in a street corner at a street light talking with God about this, and he said, what was impressed in my heart was not the renovation of the church, but the renovation of the hearts of the people in the church. And so that man began a United Methodist men's group, which still meets. And that was in '97. So that's good. It's 21 years later, it's meeting. What actually happened was phenomenal. When we came down to the end of it, came back into a charge meeting, every one of the 12 people stood up and said that in fact one woman said, I want the metal church, but God wants this church fixed. And they fixed that church, and they put in stained glass windows throughout the church that different families dedicated. But the thing that was extraordinary was there was 100% agreement in that church. Now, keep in mind that about 6 years before that, the church had been fractured in half by the purchase of a copier. And it had oh no, this was not funny. I mean, it really was not a joke. There were 2 office supply companies in the town. One was a parishioner and the other was not. Guess which one they went and bought the copier from without even getting a quote from the parishioner. But it was a power act. Anyhow, for a church that had that kind of power squabbles a few years before, it was just a gift of God to be in agreement and to realize that this is what God wanted, and that's what it was all about. As to this church, I feel like a lot of things that have been going on, such as how to handle right now while we don't have an extra minister, are really attempting to be done in a discerning way, using prayer, listening, gathering information from everyone in the church who wants to provide that information, sitting with that information. I mean, that's part of the heart of discernment, is feeling your emotions. Are you feeling a sense of consolation? Are you feeling a sense of desolation? Are you feeling good about doing this or not? But I think it's also important in discernment always to try on both answers. So if you try on the yes answer to do something, try on the no also, and see if the no feels the opposite. That make sense? I'm sorry, okay, thank you.
Well, I appreciate that comment.
Oh, the discernment, it took 12 weeks. I put him on a 12-week course to do it, because that's what... From the time we had our first conference and realized that we had a split church on what they wanted to do, to how to get that church in agreement to what to do was 12 weeks, 3 months.
Well, 100% agreement is, I'm wondering if you're stretching your story a little bit.
It's a disagreement, no one voted anyway.
I mean, I believe in prayer, but, you know,
12 weeks they would vote, no one.
June,
Yeah, I have a question for Bishop Joe.
beg pardon?
I have a question for Bishop Joe.
Good.
A friend of mine went to Indiana and visited relatives there and went to the church she had grown up in. And they were closing the church. And she said there is a surplus of ministers up there because a lot of the churches are closing, Methodist churches. And so I want to know, why can't we get a minister from Indiana or someplace up there? Why do we have to be searching and not getting supplied?
I think that's a really good question. I think Bishop Joe should address that.
Take the way it works.
I have no answer. You know, there are a lot of pastors who are assigned to cross conferences, Jim, but usually it's initiated with the bishop, and the bishop contacts another bishop that asks for a particular pastor, and they make the arrangements for that transfer. Now, in this case, I don't know why this is not done. I mean, I don't know where the surpluses are, but sometimes local churches will find a pastor and ask the cabinet to make a temporary appointment. And I'm a retired pastor, yeah. And I have done that before. But I don't know where, I understand that there are a limited number of pastors this year in our conference. Remember, the bishop works primarily within the conference that he or she is assigned to.
Yes.
Could we post it on Craigslist? I mean, let's do something modern here to solve this problem.
There you go.
Be creative.
That certainly is creative thinking. Yes. Come up here and talk to us, Julie.
Discernment is a great call. And I have two examples. First of all, this kind of may go into your next week lesson, but I think there is a personal call for discernment. And I can remember from college, my internal call had to do with social work. That was my major. And as a Christian, as I was re-updating my funeral plans for my daughters just the other day, I do this frequently, because you just never know, especially when you're traveling, and we're going to be traveling. So I told them, my focus has been and always is, in terms of living as per Jesus' call, this world, and to do things in this world, to make it a better place for people. And just to give you an example of something that some of us in this room did that you read about in the Austin paper and you read about in the Sun, but it was great fun last Tuesday when some of us marched. A couple hundred maybe, 150 of us marched around the county, our Williamson County courthouse. And we were singing and some a young group of activists from Austin were there facilitating, leading this. And then if you look real careful in the there's this picture of people marching into the house. By the time we marched around, we went inside the courthouse to sit upstairs where you can probably fit about half of our group. And I was up in the front, but I'm in this picture, I can tell because of the back of my shirt. So anyway, it was great fun. And we were there because of Teton Hunter and those of us who are really, really involved in immigration situations in our JFON here in our church. I want you to know that in the last 6 months, in spite of all the advertising our volunteers have done for our monthly clinic to be held at Gethsemane, in the last 6 months, no one has signed up. And why? I think it's fear. Be that as it may, this Teton Hunter, some of our members also of Methodist Federation for Social Action have visited Teton Hunter, still visit Teton Hunter. Our lawyer, Virginia Raymond, helps people in Teton Hunter with their situations. I could tell lots of stories, but all I want to say is this marching group felt that Williamson County should make a statement that they number one, basically didn't want to be associated with a particular for-profit group that runs Teton Hunter, because there have been examples of not the best kind of treatment for the women in that place. Now, when we were sitting there in front of the 5 or 6, how many on the council, Williamson County Commission? Williamson County Commission, 5 or 6. I know one of the persons very, very well, Cynthia Long, because she is a good friend of my daughter in Cedar Park. And I waved at her and smiled, and then this request of ours was number 31 on the list of items for Williamson County Commission the other day. And they did a wonderful thing. I mentioned to the person next to me, wouldn't it be great if they just changed that and put us first? Well, all of a sudden, after we did the Pledge of Allegiance, I said, we're going to address this one first. I think they really didn't want us sitting in that courtroom for an hour or so. We might misbehave, who knows. So, yes, they did it. And my friend, my acquaintance, Cynthia, surprised me because she recommended that Williamson County cease supporting this particular company that ran the facility. It's still a facility that is the government's facility, and who knows what will happen to it. But she put that forward, and the committee voted 5-1 to cease and desist being part of support of that non-profit, of that for-profit community. And then one of the other members, Terry Cook, wrote a great article in the Sun about how it's a lot more complicated than this, and this is just a start. If you are, like me, a person who wants to see a better immigration policy, better care and concern and so forth for our immigrants who seek asylum, etc. I read in the paper this morning that there are 50,000 backed up cases of sanctuary request in the courts that deal with that. And anyway, that's just one comment about follow your passion. That's a discernment. The other thing I want you to know is that the church internationally, United Methodist Church, has a discernment thing going on right now. And in this case, if you are interested, at some point in the fall, I would love to share, make your wishes known to our leader here. But I would love to share about what this discernment process is all about. What is the committee on the way forward? What is the discipline statement they're looking at? What are the options this committee has put forth that the church leadership and representatives of the church will be voting on sometime, I believe, in February. And I really think you would be interested to hear the foundation of that, the various verses it involves, and options via discernment, different discernment options of those verses. I'd love to share that.
Julie, I will be getting the lesson on the first Sunday in August on that subject.
Great, great,
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
very good.
Okay, well, thank you, Julie.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Julie. And yes, I'm glad that Bishop Wilson announced that he has agreed to speak to us. What was that, the first Sunday of August? August. And I can't think of anyone who is more qualified to speak on that subject. And so you might circle that on your calendar. That's one day I think you really want to be here. Well, Julie, I appreciate your comments. You're exactly right. Discernment for a Christian goes beyond our church, obviously, and into various forms and causes of social work and so on. And I think we are all aware of your involvement and appreciate your work and your ministry in that field. I didn't know that you had studied that in college, that was your interest. I guess it's always been your interest. It would be interesting to talk to you one day as to, what caused you to be so involved and so interested in that subject. I think that somehow another compassionate heart is a good deal of it. Well, I have enjoyed bringing this to your attention. Do we have any other questions or comments on this subject? So,
Mr. Teacher, I am just going to say a benediction to the morning. The benediction is not mine, but it's John Wesley's. And it's, there is no holiness without social holiness. Which says to me, yes, we come out of the world and all of its worldliness, but we are called to go back into the world with Christ's Spirit. Amen.
what a wonderful statement. And I appreciate that as a benediction, but I do want to bring us back to our local church. Each week I want us to do this. If we ranked ourselves very high in this matter of being a friendly church and greeting, how would we rank ourselves as being a church of discernment, of prayer, of contemplation, making that a priority as we go forward? How would you rate us or rate us really? How do you feel? Do you feel like this is a strength or something that really needs attention? Ann, do you have an opinion?
I think we're making a turnaround more towards prayer. I think
My personal feeling is I think we've gone through a period where we've been away from prayer. After having a period, you may remember back like when Brenda was here. We did the labyrinth at special times. We had workshops on prayers. We did vigils on prayers. We did other things. And then we've had to move away from that, and I feel that prayer is more critical in the church today. I feel more of a move in that direction and more of an openness to do discernment in the future.
And I do agree with you. As I worked on this for a couple of weeks, this lesson, I thought to myself, I really think that the church as a whole ought to have a priority on prayer and getting back to prayer and making it literally a priority throughout our church, not just in the Sunday school class, but throughout our church. And right now our church is in kind of is an unusual point in its history, but it is certainly something that we can deal with, and I'm sure we'll deal with. We will deal with. But on the other hand, it would be so helpful if in the process we became a more prayerful congregation.
Can I suggest we all prayerfully lift up for God that the right person to come as associate will come at the right time, for the right amount? If the church is praying for it, who knows what God may do?
That's right, Ann. Well, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful 4th of July. All right.